Hello and welcome on the Barricades. This is a podcast produced by Eastern European journalists and academics. I am your host, Maria Cernat, an academic based in Bucharest, Romania. The co-host of the show, Boyan Stanislavski, was supposed to be here, but since you know that he is a Bulgarian-born Polish journalist, he travels a lot between Poland and Bulgaria, and he is currently flying to Sofia. So unfortunately, he couldn't join this interesting discussion and meeting with our special guest, Joseph Tripician. I think it's the correct pronunciation, right? American producer, writer, screenplayer, film director, songwriter. I mean, he has a spectacular career in the media. And he's connected to the Balkans. And because it was in 1997 that he was asked by a name Jakov Sedlar, that was also a filmmaker, a Croatian filmmaker, personal propagandist of that President Franjo Tudjman. For the ones that do not know, he is the first president of Croatia right after Yugoslavia split. And our guest was asked to write a book about this president. And as you may find out if you follow what he wrote and what the documentaries he produced, you may see that it didn't go according to the plan. And even though Joe Tripician thought that he was going to be able to write an honest book about the Croatian president, that was not the case. So, and this is very, very interesting, I think, because I think it was a very clever PR move in the sense that on the part of the Croatian president to contact an American journalist to write a book that offers legitimacy, that offers a good image, that offers access to various media platforms in order to create for yourself a very good image. And let me tell you that in Romania, basically Bulgaria, and all over Eastern Europe, this idea of PR was rather new in the sense that I started studying PR in 1997, and I was the first generation in Romania, for example, to even study PR. That was completely novel. So, do you think it was a clever PR move on the part of Franjo Tudjman?
Yes, it certainly was. I'm not certain it was Tudjman's idea. I think it was mostly the idea of Mate Granic, his aide de camp. And although it was a clever idea, the execution was really ham-handed. It was like they stepped on a rake because, Yakov, even though he was the President Tudjman's personal propagandist, his films were quite clunky, quite obvious in their propagandistic, efforts. He gained a nickname as the Leni Riefenstahl of Croatia, but I added, but without the talent of that great filmmaker and a Nazi collaborator. The PR, consisted of many parts. It was traditional, taking advertisement and doing news stories in the American press, trying to get tourism back to the country, which was a really good and noble idea after the war, this was 2 years after the war ended. But it also wanted to, I think that the real reason, I didn't know this at first, the real reason they wanted an American to write the book, as you said, is to give legitimacy to it, but it was also to refurbish Tudjman's image in the eyes of the West, because even though the American government had supported Croatia in its efforts to push back against Serbian aggression, and it was America who was somewhat principally responsible for forcing Bosnian Muslims and the Serb Croatians to join forces in order to push back against the Serbs. There was a problem in that they wanted to, this is typical of of many propagandist initiatives. They wanted to refurbish Tudjman's image because Tudjman was deathly afraid of being called to the International War Crimes Tribunal in The Hague to face sentencing for war crimes. And Tudjman admitted this himself. It's on record and on video, saying to a small group of generals after the war, he says, everyone in this room has to be ready to be called up and to face The Hague. So
but the problem is that he was controversial, so it was a clever PR move meant to cover some of his activities and some of he took part in some, he was related to death camps, he was related to very controversial, to express it euphemistically, things, so probably he was trying to cover it up.
Well, this was really made crystal clear to me when, after I returned from the Balkans and started to work on the book, they really were pushing me to get it finished. So it took me about a couple of months to get a first draft manuscript. And once I handed it in to Mr. Yakov Sedlar, he called me the following day saying that he wanted to speak about a few topics. Okay, so I'm meeting with him, and I said, okay, what are the things you want to talk about? He says, oh, we like your book very much, but first to consider making small changes. Okay, what? I asked. And he said, well, first, not to mention anything of the old communist past, because Tudjman was a general under Tito in the former Yugoslavia, and by all accounts, he was significant in supporting Tito, even though he was jailed twice during the Croatian Spring for the initiative to push back against the suppression of the books that he wrote, which expressed Croatian independence, which was verboten under communist Yugoslavia. I said to Yakov, well, if I do that, the book will be very thin. And I said, okay, what's the second part? Well, the second part, he says, was to please not to mention anything about the war crimes. I said, you can't do that because it's been reported in the New York Times and on various North American outlets that there has been suspicion at that time that wasn't proven yet that Tudjman was responsible to some degree for the establishment of the death camps in Bosnia. And so Yakov says, no, we can't do that, absolutely not. I said, well, I can't write this book because it's going to have my name attached to it. I'd have no credibility because people who at least have some knowledge of the Balkans are going to see that it's just pure propaganda. So the book was never published, and but I did get an interesting story, an interesting experience out of it.
I bet you got a very interesting experience, but tell me, did they pay you any of the money that they promised? Because they promised a lot of money, and I think it was part of the reasons why you took the job.
Yes, definitely. Yes. Fortunately, I had an ironclad contract written by my attorney, and I received over a period of a couple of months $40,000, which was a life saving because I was $50,000 in debt at that time, and the little coda to this whole enterprise was that I played both sides of the fence. At this point in my journey, at the end of the journey, when I was handing in the manuscript, I had decided to definitely write from my point of view, what I saw and what I felt. And it was a trouble because I wanted to give Tudjman his due. I wanted to explain that even though he had this relationship with death camps, even though he had expelled the Serb citizens of Croatia and suppressed free speech, etc., he was the only person at the time who was able to defend Croatia and was able to bring it into its own independence. So it was a balancing act for me. But I was able to say to Yakov, I said, well, let me consider how I can maybe burnish his image a little bit more and have more emphasis on his positives. But to do that, I'm going to have to take another month or two to write. I need another 10,000. He says, okay, sure, you get that. So that's what I was able to squeeze out of him. Again, the manuscript I turned in, which I did honestly try to make it a little bit more fair and balanced, they rejected because I wouldn't cut out the things about the war crimes. I just couldn't do that and have my name on the book.
Of course, of course. But tell us more about the death camps. Probably for somebody like me that was like 14 at that time, I think it's worth refreshing our memory. What were they
Yeah.
about, and what do you think was the connection between Tudjman and the death camps?
The direct connection was a man named Mate Granic, who was at that time the president of the Bosnian Croats. And Tudjman's goal was always to expand Croatia's borders into Bosnia and Herzegovina, principally Herzegovina, because that had access to the Adriatic coast, which was a big income generator for tourism and for shipping, etc. So Mate Granic had a nickname. His nickname was the Mobster. And the Mobster was fiercely loyal to Tudjman. He died before I got to Croatia, but I did meet with his close advisor, a man that I called in my book, Balkanized at Sunrise, I called him the priest, but I eventually came out and named him Vlado Pogarčić. So Vlado Pogarčić was responsible for the public relations of this little Croatian Bosnian statelet called Herceg Bosna. Okay, so the mobster, Mate Boban, as I said, as Vlado Pogarčić told me, was fiercely loyal to Tudjman. And according to Pogarčić, this was Boban's downfall, because when Peter Galbraith, the ambassador to Croatia, had started to exert pressure on Mate Boban, specifically through the international press, where he said that these death camps in Bosnia were a disgrace to Croatia, and that Mate Boban had to do something about it, or else the Americans will take action. Now, the Americans were again the big supporters of Croatia in this war. The hawks involved, which were Peter Galbraith and Madeleine Albright, were pushing for more to lift the sanctions against importation of arms and weaponry. And now you're going to start seeing different parallels to today's situation in Ukraine. But before we get to that, it was important, Pogarčić told me, to realize that Tudjman was the reason for Boban's downfall, the reason that he, quote unquote, resigned. It was that he fell on his sword to protect Tudjman, because Tudjman did direct. Mate Boban did not do anything without Tudjman's directive. It may have come down the pipeline through different generals and administrators, but he was the one that set up the death camps, and he was the one that took the fall to protect Tudjman and protect Tudjman's image.
I understand, but what happened? Do we have enough data about how many people were actually killed there?
I think that the numbers, I don't have them at the tip of my tongue or in front of me, but we do know that the war in total was 140,000 deaths and 4 million refugees, and that it took 30,000 U.S. troops, along with NATO's peacekeeping commission, to lead the military mission in Bosnia. So the numbers would be available online. Again, apologies for not knowing it, but the whole situation there, the torture, the deaths, and the rapes, have been gradually being erased by the current regime. And you'll see each side in this whole historical revisionistic movement. It continues to this day. It started back in '97 with that PR campaign. So in order to gain more political power, in order to gain more reparations via EU grants and backing from European Union, from the West, from Britain, the United States, etc. There's this game of victimhood. There is this victimhood Olympics happening now, where if you can claim that your side, your country has suffered more, has a higher number of deaths, then you win the victimhood of Olympics. You be able to get more grants from the EU. You're able to get more political capital. And so that's why you see the erasure of these places where they were death camps. They were schools. There were garages. There were hospitals. This is where all these things have happened. And there's a movement on the activist front to memorialize them, so they're not erased from history. But because of these different factions involved, talking about the Serbs, the Croatians, and the Bosniaks, each side is fighting for more victimhood. And so that's why you'll see, for example, two sets of books being taught in schools in Bosnia, one from the Croat side and one from the Bosniak side. It's a sad thing. It's a fight that's ongoing. It's like what my producer, my documentary, which is still in production. It's not finished yet. But she said to me, she grew up. She was about 7 during the war. She said to me that the war has continued. It's just the bombs and the bullets have stopped, but the fighting continues by the vitriolic propaganda that exists today.
About the propaganda, tell me a little bit about the sentiment of this, the ideology basically of Tudjman and the people surrounding him. Were they right wing extremists? Were they hardline nationalists? How would you characterize? And the ones that participated really in the killings, the tortures, were there people that were right wing, I suppose, and quite xenophobic?
Yeah, okay, there's a lot to unpack there, so we'll take it from the top. Tudjman always had this grand vision that Croatia, as I mentioned earlier, should expand back to its historical borders, which includes parts of Bosnia and Herzegovina. And he got this from his father, because his father was, during the war, the Second World War, remember the partisans were part of the Tito's anti-fascist regime, but also that the Croatians, a subset of Croatians, were part of the Ustasha. Ustasha was this Nazi-backed statelet in Croatia that was directly financed by fascist Italy. Okay, short walk across the Adriatic. The Ustasha were ultra Croatian nationalists and were more barbaric by a lot of historic accounts than the actual German Nazis. Where the German Nazis had industrialized mass killing, the Ustasha preferred to do their killing one-on-one, Axis, etc. So as part of Tudjman's bicameral philosophy, he was an official, a partisan soldier. His father was, and he got that. But he also got from his father the nationalistic tendency that the Ustasha was part of the NDH, the National Democratic Nationalist Movement of Croatia, and that was the overriding goal. It was not anti-fascism; it was pro-Croatian nationalism, and so you see that in in Tudjman's decisions during the war. And you see that in his post-war push for returning the nationalistic symbols of the NDH, to renaming street signs after the heroes of the NDH. And you see that in Yakov Sedlar's documentaries of trying to refurbish the image of Ante Pavelic, the leader of the Ustasha. Oh, well, he was just a nationalist, just to try to bring back our ancient historical traditions and all this other shit, let's say. Can I say that on the podcast?
Yeah. And I think it quite, underlies exactly the thing that it is. I mean, it's a very good libel for this type of, and I know because we have it in Romania, the equivalent of this ultra xenophobic and nationalist is the Legionnaires. We had the Iron Guard, and they were calling themselves the Legionnaires. And we saw after 1989 parallel efforts to say that, oh, these were really very good guys. There were just some extreme elements, and the killings of the Jews, no, they were not so, and they were trying, to emphasize the idea that these were actually good people. So I see that across the region, there is this tendency of trying refurbish and to cast a positive light on the right-wing extremists.
Yeah, yeah. And so if you go down to his,
Exactly.
Tudjman's immediate cadre of advisors, you see that some are more moderate. Mate Granic, who was involved in the Dayton Peace Agreement, but you also see other people who have been, called to The Hague, mostly some of his generals, and you will see that the nationalists have won. They had the majority vote in terms of the implementation. And again, it was a one-man government. It really all came down from Tudjman and Tudjman's vision. Tudjman was, by all accounts, an old-timey racist. He had more in common and felt more fraternity with Serbian leader Slobodan Milosevic than he did with the Bosnian leader Alija Izetbegovic. And that came into play in Dayton, where I always say that you can count the amount of war crimes committed by either side by the amount of opportunity they had. So, for example, Milosevic had control over the JNA, the Yugoslav army. So he had the barracks and he had the ammunition and the weaponry. And Croatia had to depend on smuggling guns from Iran. But before that happened, they were just left with some, old World War II army rifles. And of course, Bosnia was squeezed in between the two. That's why you see that the Serbs had the most acts of war crimes, followed by Croatia, followed by Bosnia. No one is exempt from fault in this. In fact, I know I'm wandering, but I'll get back to the main question that I asked Tudjman in my interview with him directly. I said, "Do you think that war crimes are an unavoidable part of war?" And he looked like he was pissed at my question. And he said, these people here, our heroes could not help themselves, and it's unfair to call these. This was the day before that the Croatian war criminals suspects were brought to The Hague. He says, you should not call them criminals. They had not been indicted yet, and if it wasn't for them, Croatia would not have its freedom today. So that I got my answer straight from the horse's mouth, so to say. Tudjman died, and the new president, Mesic, took power. They found a secret stash of audio recordings, which basically out of Tudjman's mouth says that if it wasn't for these people here, we would not have Croatia today. So one side's war heroes are another side's war criminals, and you see that playing out to this day. Back into ancient times. But to get back to your question, I forgot. You asked how many hardliners were there? I hadn't kept
Yes, yes.
the
I
count.
was wondering about, the atmosphere. What were his ideas, and the
Uh,
surrounding, the people who actually were in
yeah.
charge. What were they thinking? And also the guy that suggested that you write the book. What was he? How would you characterize him ideologically?
Oh no, well he's the doctor. I call him Doctor Tony. I don't think he wants me to mention his name. But so he was my doctor at that time, and he was also Yakov's doctor at that time, because Yakov was the cultural attaché of Croatia to the United Nations, where he was based in New York. And so I asked uh, Dr. Tony, in my conversations with him, if he knew of any work I could do, because I was in desperately need of money. And he says, "Oh, I'm going to introduce you to this guy, Yakov, And I asked him, how do you get introduced to Yakov? He says, "Oh, that was through some broad I was banging." So Dr. Tony was old style Long Island. He wasn't part of the mob, but he buddied with the mobs, Italian mafia in Long Island, New York. And so I met with Yakov, and I didn't find this out till later. But Yakov says, "Oh, Dr. Tony had recommended you. You're a great author." And this is funny because at that time, I was really confused by this. At that time, the only book I had published was a humor book. It was called The Official Alien Abductees Handbook. It was, again, a humor book. And so I was just confused by this. And I eventually found out that the reason Yakov had invited me to, write this book was that he had believed Dr. Tony, I was this great author, because Dr. Tony had saved the life of his daughter. She had some health condition, and Dr. Tony intervened and did that. So, good for him. Good for Tony, good for Yakov. It would have been nice if they had told me this, but that's the way these things happen. And so I was, as I said, deep in debt. I really was interested in getting out of debt. And I was also interested in taking this journey. Wanted to learn more about the Balkans. And hopefully, to be honest, at that time, as a recently divorced single guy, I was hoping to meet some Balkan women who might be impressed by an American passport.
Oh,
I'm
and
happily married
that's
now. I've got 2 kids, so that's in the past.
that's in the past, right?
Mhm.
Okay, okay. So, um, well, I say that most journalists would have just taken the money and just,
Yeah.
accepted the changes that were suggested. So, what prompted you to rebel?
I started speaking to people other than the politicians who Yakov introduced me to. I started speaking to dissident journalists. I
Mm.
started speaking with political and anti-war activists. I started to speak to people who, just because they wrote some slightly negative things about Tudjman, their cars were bombed early in the morning.
Uh,
So I started to understand the way Tudjman had control of the press there. In fact, it was Mati Granic, his advisor, who told me that, frankly, their regime has more control, of television than they do of the press, the written press. And when I told that to Tudjman, I said, "Your Mati Granic, your senior advisor, had told me off the record that you have more control of TV than you had the press." And he excelled. He said, went like this, "Mati, Mati." And he says, "Let me tell you one thing. I know your intentions are good, but we here in Croatia have more freedom of press than you do in the United States."
wow,
That gives
wow.
you another insight into his way of thinking. So yeah, it was on one night. It was a rainy night in Sarajevo. Yakov didn't want me to come to Sarajevo, but I realized that Sarajevo was at the heart, that Bosnia was at the heart of Tudjman's story. To whether to hang him on these crimes or to let him scurry away from it. And so I said to Yakov, says, I need to go there. He said, no, no, Joe, you must not go. There was a bomb that happened in the church this day. I forbid you from going. I said, okay, we'll see about that. And I went directly to his travel agent. I said, Yakov wants me to go to Sarajevo. Please, put a ticket on his account and book me a room at the Holiday Inn. So I landed there, and that's when I started to get a full picture by being there and meeting the people there. And so it was one rainy night in Sarajevo. I said, I'm split. I was on the horns of a dilemma that I had created myself. Because if I had thought a little bit through, if I went past my naivete and my desire for money and for meeting women, I would have seen that it would be impossible to do what they asked, write this glowing hagiography and not be known as paid propagandist, and not to ask myself, am I okay with that? Or if I was to write something that was totally honest and come, be forthright in saying the crimes that Tudjman was directly responsible for, then I would be known as an enemy of the state. Not something that I had thought through until I realized that, even though I don't have a car, they know where I am. They know they were following me. I know that they were following me everywhere I went. And it was funny to see that same black sedan parked outside my hotel, following me. In any case, I said, I've got to make a choice because I can't do both. So I made a choice, not to write the book that they paid me for, but to write the book to give voice to the voiceless, to give voice to the people of the Balkans, Serbs, the Croatians, and Bosnians, who didn't choose this war, and the people who fought, who were whipped up by extreme nationalism and by this extreme propaganda, primarily back then in television. You can go see the anti-Serb, commercials and the et cetera, et cetera. They were told that your neighbors, the people that you've known for generations, your kids go to school together, you intermarry, they're the ones causing the problems. They're the ones that are going to be out to get you, okay? Because they're of a different nationality, they're a different ethnicity, and so how easily someone's identity can be triggered into torching your neighbor's house. It's
that's really terrible. That's really terrible what the propaganda can do. And unfortunately, I would say that not enough is written about it, and not enough is written. I mean, my hypothesis now, I want to talk a little bit theoretically, is that when the elites had the power to control the narrative, for instance, I was taught during my years in the university that people are rational, they have the right to choose, that you cannot censor anything, that the media effects are exaggerated, the propaganda effects are exaggerated, and that people have, reason, and they make their decisions according to their, best interests. And now suddenly, I think not enough money was invested in really studying the effects of propaganda. And they only started to discuss propaganda and to discuss censorship when they no longer controlled the narrative. Then they ended up with somebody like Donald Trump on their hands. And things didn't go according to the plan. And when they were not able to control the narrative, this is my perspective.
No, it's true. And what Trump did was very clever, because he fused his politics, his run for the presidential campaign and to be his reelection, on identity. It's about identity politics. Okay, so the liberals, they're the pedophiles, and you are the real earth, the people of the earth, the common, the hard workers, etc. And so they're out to get you. All right. So once you are able to infuse politics or political agenda into a person's ideology, then you do control them. It is like being part of the cult, and the part of it is that our identity is directly, connected to what they call the mammalian brain, or the lizard brain, the amygdala, the actual word for it, which is part of the limbic system, and that's responsible for processing our emotions. And because cognitive science has proven that we make our decisions subconsciously, and that then our logical brain, our cerebellum makes
Justification.
the reasons, the excuses, right? And that this survival instinct that the amygdala has is part of the fight or flight response. Will it eat me? Can I eat it? Can I have sex with it? This which you can control that. It's very hard, to basically deprogram somebody whose identity is fused directly into their amygdala. So
Yes,
yeah,
yes. So tell me a little bit about the reaction of your colleagues, the co-workers, the media. How was your effort in bringing, the truth, or your version of the truth, and giving the opportunity for the people that you said were voiceless in this conflict to have their say in what happened? How was this perceived? Were you lauded? Were you criticized? Were you ignored? What was the reaction?
yes, all of those, depending on the group. It's like the old Balkan saying, "Why should I be a minority in your country and you could be a minority in mine?" So I could tell directly by the way they speak and their political stance whether they were a Serb or a Croat or a Bosniak. But again, even within those countries, of course, there are divisions, political ideology. Okay, just like you see in most countries. All right, you've got the hardcore extremists on the left, the hardcore extremists on the right, and you've got the people in the middle who just want to get by, who just want to feed their children. Those are the people I'm talking about. So they understood and were really, really positive. The response was very positive. I did in 2002 a one-man show. Detailing my whole trip there and journey, and people who were expats came up and were thanking me. I connected with people from different expat communities from the Balkans, and these were people who grouped. They were Serbs and they were Bosniaks, and and they were Croats, to help navigate their way as expats into the American system. How can you get benefits? How can you get employment? Where are the opportunities being? How can we give you therapeutic help and to for your for the traumas that you faced during the war. So there's a particular group in New York called Raccoon. I hooked up with people there, and I did some benefit for them. And so those are the people who gave me the positive responses. The people who gave me the negative responses or I knew exactly what side on the spectrum they were, and so it was just to be expected. But the American press and the international press. I mean, I did several interviews with Balkan press, and particularly Croatian press, and more recently Balkan Insight, and different podcast interviews. The they would once or twice a year do some sort of story on me, but I couldn't get any traction at all from the Americans. I couldn't get any of my articles published in there. And it was okay. I remember the beginning of the war. Okay, the West, America's response was, we don't have a dog in that fight. This was Bush, under Bush. Clinton came in. It was the same type of policy. It wasn't until the American public, after seeing images in CNN of the Sarajevo, market bombing, that pressure started to come on him just as he was coming up to get to his reelection campaign. So it was a political decision. Holbrook talked about it in his book, and the one, but remind me to get back to Holbrook, won't you? And so the response was like this wasn't happening. So I had still I didn't take care of my debt because I was still putting credit card debt on my company, and then I started a internet video company. I had an opportunity to try to get into the market early in that because the digital video editing and filming market was getting, which was the bulk of my income at the point, was getting less and less because the introduction of digital video equipment and laptop computers, desktop computers, was made more affordable for my clients to do their own editing.
Mm-hmm.
So I got into that, and then I had started building that internet company up until 9/11, where I had two of my major clients were in the World Trade Center, and it was a tragic loss. So I got into bankruptcy, and I just started to just return to the story, did my one man show, because now I was just living on, on the benefits that I got from New York and some help from relatives. And I started, to decide, okay, I'm going to, write this book. I started seriously to write the book once I was able to get a stable income through the last staff job I had in this large public media communications company, a very well-paying job. And I was able to do that up until the time I decided to quit the job, which I set a date. My wife and I was Brazilian. We were going to plan to move down to Brazil. We had two young girls, so it was a good time to move. And I was ready to give him my notice in January of 2009, when in December of 2008, I had my immediate superior and the head of HR come to me and said, "Sorry, Joe, we're going to have let you go because, we still need to cut costs and blah, blah, blah." I thanked them. They said, "Why are you thanking us?" I said, "Well, because now I get a severance and now I get unemployment. And now I can move to Brazil with some money in my pocket." So that's when I wrote the book, and I started to get a little bit more interest in the book, but still not enough to make a dent in my income. So I was just focusing on taking care of the family here, and trying to eventually work on a documentary, which I said that we're about halfway through filming. And so I hope with that we're going to get a lot more notice, because just by showing clips and rough cuts and excerpts of it, different film markets, the feedback has been extremely positive, and we are close to getting the rest of the financing together, and maybe with the help of your audience, even sooner than later.
Yes, yes, yes. I mean, we have a small community of donors, and also to the viewers, if you like what you saw, please support Joe's movie, because I think it's a very good initiative. It's in one thing to have a book, but when you have a documentary, you can actually see, hear things, images, and it's much more alive. So I really think it will be very valuable, especially for Eastern European countries, because while you were discussing, I saw so many common points with what happened in Romania, starting with the fact that the right wing extremists were starting to be, embellished, so to speak, and presented to the public in a very positive light, and ending up with the idea that probably the Hungarians, because here in Eastern Europe, in the Balkans, you have a lot of problems, and we have one with Hungary, because there are 2 districts in Romania. 90% of the population is Hungarian, And it's a good opportunity for xenophobes, to push their agenda while demonizing this minority. I mean, it's all these things. And I think we were lucky in the sense, this is the last speculation that I want you to comment on. I think, in a sense, Romania was lucky to have pushed Ceausescu out of power and have a revolution, because if Ceausescu would have stayed in power, probably this type of ethnic conflict would have happened to Romania. I think Yugoslavia was the scene of secret services, and especially Western ones, really pushing people and encouraging this type of hatred. And I think it was Yugoslavia because it was a successful socialist project, and it refused to die on its own. It refused to, confirm the narrative that socialism is bad.
Yeah, it's you make a lot of great points there, and I agree with practically all of that. I see that in fact, when a country has these extremist factions, they're being pushed in different directions. It's the people who want more power and the people who want more money, because power means you can get more money. Uh, they are the ones that are in control, and it's up to the people who, just like your brave people who fought against Ceausescu. It's up against them. It's up against the individuals, because I heard something. Tell me this is true, that the Ceausescu's boarded a helicopter, and the helicopter took off. It was about to take them out of the country until the pilot, is this true? The pilot saw that there was an enormous crowd of the population that was against them, and he thought to himself, "I'm on the wrong side." And that is that when he decided to
I
bring them
think it's
down or
an
not?
embellished. I think it's a little bit an embellished story, in the sense that Ceausescu started to give his speech to a crowd that was mostly of beer people, because there were power shortages and food shortages. We fed ourselves, and having rations. I basically, all my childhood, I remember going with my grandmother to the store and buying a certain amount of bread, oil, and all the rest. It was horrible, because he wanted to give back the loan he took from the International Monetary Fund. But I think it was mainly orchestrated by the army. I think the army had already turned against him,
Uh-huh.
and I think he signed his death certificate uh, in July, I think, when Gorbachev came to Romania, and they spent the whole night fighting and screaming at each other. And I think that was the point when Ceausescu uh, in theory, he was out, and practically it happened in
Uh-huh.
December.
Interesting. Interesting.
Because
Yeah.
in Romania, let me tell you that the security apparatus was and still is very powerful. So this idea of the pilot not obeying the order, and taking Ceausescu to Târgoviște and not in Bulgaria or some places, I think it's a little bit over the top, because probably they would have sent another plane just to kill them if they would have found out, because
Uh,
the security apparatus is still and was very, very powerful. And even today, we have a lot of secret service agents, and basically we have very, very inefficient parliamentary control and oversight over their activities. So
so tell
nothing
me,
moves there without their knowing,
so Maria, are you in any danger just by speaking about this, or?
No, I mean, the way they do it. If you are very popular, I'm not very popular, so I
Oh,
enjoy, the benefit of being. Because if you want to get into power, and if you want to become somebody really important, especially in politics, then you have to somehow sign a deal with them, in the sense that, for instance, in Romania, you have most people that are in position of power that graduated some form of security studies master, or going to a program in security organized by the Secret Services Academy, or having some sort of link, to the whole thing, or signing an agreement, for instance, even if you are a counselor to somebody who's in power in Romania, you have to sign a contract allowing the Secret Service to investigate you and the members of your family, and you don't have the right to know what their conclusions are. So
So
that's
even
kind
if you
of,
were enemy of the state, you wouldn't know it.
yeah. Or and they gather information about you, and then you are like a clock, and they have the key to turn it, and then so
Well, that's it. Blackmail is another big, political leverage, to use. And so we had to think about all of these things. We had to think about the economics, we had to think about follow the money, think about the message that's being played, who's the messenger, and who's behind the messenger. Qui bono, who benefits, as the old Latin phrase goes.
yes,
But
but
I
I
did.
think, please go ahead.
No, no. Well, I'm just sorry. I'm hopping around because I do want to mention this before I forget about the fall of Srebrenica. We talk about genocide here, and the role that Holbrooke and his friendship / rivalry with Anthony Lake comes into play, because I was reminded of it because politics is also personal. He talked about the personal battle between Ceausescu and Gorbachev. All right, so this is something that up until recently was not known. So you've got Anthony Lake, who was the America's national security advisor. Now, he told the contact group. Contact group is the group of American and British and French, et cetera. The West's negotiating group to end the war. He told the group's negotiator, Robert Fraser, that the safe areas, remember that the people, fled into Srebrenica because they were safe areas, the United Nations said, you're safe here, no one can harm you. They fled into Srebrenica because of these safe areas. Well, Fraser said that these safe areas constituted a monstrous excrescence within Serbian territory, and that Fraser reported to Lake that Milosevic would not agree to peace unless he had a modified map that seeded the safe areas. Okay, so then what happened was that, just to make a really painful, horrible, tragic, long story short, the safe areas fell. The UN allowed the women and children to leave the areas, and then killed all of the men and the boys en masse, 8,000 of them. The rivalry between Holbrooke and Lake, and Holbrooke had said in a 2005 interview that he was under initial instructions to sacrifice Srebrenica. Now, that would have come from Lake. Now, I don't know how much Holbrooke pushed back on that. When I interviewed him, he told me that he was confused by Lake's decision. And then I read this book that came out, I think, a year or two ago, a biography on Richard Holbrooke, where it said that they had a falling out because Holbrooke was sleeping with Tony Lake's wife. So I think this whole thing comes down to, because you're fucking my wife, I'm going to fuck over Srebrenica, which was your, cause to save it. Now, I'm not saying that's the reason. The reason goes, much greater than that little thing, but it does play a part. The reason is because the UN, the troops were captured, okay, and that stopped the NATO from bombing them. And then you've had the Dutch battalion giving in, and then you've had the UN general giving in to the Serbs. Everyone believed that the Serbs would live up to their agreement, and meanwhile, the people who were in the safe areas believed that the West would live up to their agreement.
And unfortunately, and tragedy, of massive
Horrible.
proportion unfolded. I think, yeah, it's very important to have these conversations. And you were asking who's benefiting, but I hope the viewers that saw this show are at least benefiting for being in contact with somebody who was so close to the Croatian power circles during the 90s and had the courage to push back and to tell what you thought it was true. I think that's very important, very rare. I'm sorry that you didn't get much traction in the mainstream press in the United States, but I'm not surprised because what you told went against the mainstream narrative, probably, that wanted to portray this Croatian president and somebody closer to the character that he himself wanted to present to the world. So yeah, this is it. Thank you so much for, we've been talking for almost an hour, so thank you so much for sharing these details about your work and about what you did. To the viewers, if you like what you saw, please consider supporting our guest. He's about to finish his documentary on this very interesting story that took place in the Balkans during the 90s. And also support us. Go to our page, patreon.com/the barricade, and consider supporting us. As I told you, we have a very small community of donors to whom we are very thankful. And if you can extend your generosity to our guests, that would be wonderful. Thanks so much again for being here, Joe.
Thank you, Maria. It's been a pleasure.
Okay.